Hello there and welcome to the video. South Korea and South Africa are very different countries. Currently, South Africa is troubled by soaring crime rates and high unemployment, while South Korea is now a productive country with a tech industry to rival that of Silicon Valley. So it may come as a shock that South Korea has almost no natural resources and 60 years ago was one of the poorest countries in the world. If you're new to the channel, my name is Ollie. This is Economics Unlocked, and we want to answer your questions about economics. If you enjoy the video, then why not check out some of our other videos? But for now, let's get started. When it comes to economic development, it is often said that South Korea bought an economics textbook and followed it to the letter, whereas some might say that South Africa has almost every problem an economy could have. At the end of World War II, South Africa began its history with the race-based policy known as apartheid, while Korea was plunged into another war after being occupied by Japan for over 30 years. By the mid-1960s, the Korean War had passed and South Korea began developing under a new dictatorial leader. Meanwhile, South Africa was deepening racial tensions and still untangling itself from the web of the British Empire. And this is where the differences emerge. South Korea was able to secure plenty of foreign aid from Western countries. In particular, the USA gave out huge sums to them, and in return, South Korea agreed to provide thousands of men who were trained by the Americans and used to fight in the Vietnam War. The important thing is, the Koreans used this money wisely. The Koreans focused the money on what are known as supply-side policies. Supply-side policies are projects which help reduce costs to firms by making it easier, cheaper, and ultimately better to do business in a country. For South Korea, this meant building roads and transport infrastructure. It meant the government lending money to big corporations at cheap rates and often, sometimes for free, as well as massive spending on education, in particular vocational education. These policies are often overlooked by democracies as they're not a quick fix. But they brought South Korea huge growth and prosperity in a 17-year dictatorship, as it became easy and cheap to move around the country and their workers were well prepared for skilled work. Even today, education is a core South Korean value, and it's very important among their people, although this may be a cause of their unusually high suicide rates among young people. The South Korean government spent huge amounts of money on subsidising large companies and rewarding companies that exported most. In the 1970s, South Korea experienced some issues with inflation, but they were able to quickly control the money supply and were back into double-digit growth by the 80s. In this time, South Korea had grown industries completely from scratch, producing ships, cars and electronics that were exported all over the world, despite South Korea having very little natural resources of its own, and yes, in many ways they followed the textbook strategies to achieve all this. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the intense racial conflict meant that many black people had no qualifications and little education beyond that of primary school. This was a major factor in holding back the South African economy, as most of their workforce was ill prepared for anything other than manual labour. In addition, rural infrastructure was lacking significantly, which makes it time-consuming and costly to transport around the country. These factors are the likely cause of the country's long-term issues with unemployment. While economic growth has sometimes been sustained, the South African economy has had high unemployment since World War II, and it's been gradually worsening ever since. In fact, the last time unemployment was below 20% was in 1990. Youth unemployment has been an even bigger issue and is currently at 58%. In most economies, you would expect problems like high unemployment to be solved over time, but in South Africa it has persisted for decades. And this historic issue highlights deep-rooted problems with crime and particularly corruption, which is at the heart of South Africa's problems. Former President Jacob Zuma is accused of 783 counts of corruption. He was involved not just in a few bribes here and there, but in using the full force of governments and law enforcement for personal and private gain. The total cost of these efforts is estimated at $20 billion. The problem from a development point of view is not that corruption is necessarily the cause of many of South Africa's problems, but that it has stopped many of the problems from being solved. It has stopped sensible economic decisions from being made year after year, and the result is significant underperformance in the long run. And so, while Korean leaders were investing millions on roads and education, South African leaders have been spending millions on family weddings and private jets. All the while, government debt has grown. So what's the result? Well, in 1980, South Africa's economy was nearly twice as big as South Korea's. Now, both economies are bigger, but South Africa's is nearly 5 times smaller than South Korea's. What this demonstrates is that prudent economic policy is the best way to develop an economy. If you want to grow an economy, making sure people are healthy and educated is very important, as is having well-maintained road, transport and communication infrastructure. Nowadays though, South Korea isn't without its problems. They have huge, family-run companies who operate big monopolies, and this makes their economy very inefficient. These companies are familiar brands like Samsung, LG and Hyundai, but each company makes such a huge range of products and faces almost no competition from domestic companies. And if this problem isn't addressed soon, the Koreans could find their economy lagging behind once again. Meanwhile, South Africa will need to rid itself of corruption once and for all, as well as deal with its mounting debt crisis. Although there remain many historical issues in South Africa, it is not a country without opportunity. They are lucky to have a huge amount of minerals such as diamond, gold and coal, but the extraction and profits from these need to be carefully managed. With competitive wage rates and improved infrastructure, South Africa could attract much needed foreign investment, and it could produce sustainable, long-term economic growth. Okay guys, let us know what you think about today's video in the comments section. Why not share this video with a friend to help us grow even more? And don't forget, there's a new video here every Saturday. But thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.